Okay, next I'd like to talk about the two-chair method, Polarity Therapy Counseling. So the two-chair method is a remarkable, effective, safe, efficient way to resolve binds, release trauma, reduce autonomic activation. It's just amazing. In my uh, experience in polarity therapy, this is where it began. I came into a weekend workshop in the 70s and they were doing this, and I tried it and I had such excellent results that it just really stuck with me. So the history of the two-chair method, briefly, is that about 1955 is the first mention of it in literature. In the late 60s, it seemed to be adopted by Fritz Perls in Gestalt therapy in his workshops at the very end of his career. And there's some excellent clips of him doing it way back at that time, which you can find with searching. Um, it happened that a Dr. Robert Hall was attending Fritz Perls' workshops at the same time as he was attending in the same place in Berkeley, California in the late 60s. He was attending workshops by Randolph Stone. And he was also a student of Ida Rolf. And Robert Hall had that insight to see that what Perls was doing was an application of what Stone was talking about more theoretically. And he had a strong base in body-centered processes from Ida Rolf as well. So this particularly well-educated person happened to be in just the right place at just the right time. And he put the two together, and he created a form of two-chair that was including the body reading and the energy anatomy and the cosmology of polarity therapy and the body-centered processing of Ida Rolf in with the psychological process of Fritz Perls. So that was the beginning of it. And when I stumbled into it in the 70s, it was already pretty well developed in its somewhat of a separate, unique form. So the main concept of two-chair is the same in all polarity therapy and in all therapy in general, is that healing comes from movement and problems come from fixation. And most people, especially if they're feeling stressed or threatened, most people sort of adopt a habitual primary state. And they, after a little while, they can't really feel their way out of that. It's become so normal that it just pervades everything. And they get sort of fixated in a primary state. And this can be more or less functional, but generally the more fixation, the more problems a person will have. So this method is about very simple, very easy undoing fixation by having two chairs, which we have set up here, having two chairs where you can have a complete body-centered experience of your primary state in one chair, and then you can imagine that any other part of your life, another person you know, part of yourself, someone you used to know, someone you wish you knew, a loved one who's departed, a baby who's not yet been born. Anyone else can be imagined to be in the other chair. And when you switch from your first chair to the second chair and really bring your attention into the body, the whole system starts to loosen up. It just has to. It can't help itself. It's remarkable that way. It's like walk a mile in my shoes to see how the other half lives, or these truisms that are describing something important. If we can break out of our habitual primary state of consciousness and experience, even for a short time, another alternative. So this can be used in so many different ways. I've tried to describe it in chapter 10. I'd like to just take a moment and just kind of model it. There's 3 chairs, one for the facilitator. I'm sitting in that chair right now. And the facilitator's job is mainly to guide the person to keep it body-centered and to not go too deep, not go off into some complex process. Instead, just have a light, just kind of a light experience of whatever state is there. And the practitioner's job mainly is to say switch occasionally. When you see that the person has been able to have a complete sensation-based experience of a particular state, you just say switch, because we're wanting them to experience that oscillation, a polarity swinging of a pendulum from state A to state B and back to state A to state B. And the more times it swings, the more the neurochemistry loosens up, the more a fresh perspective arises, new insights appear over and over. It has very good effect. So for example, I could be the practitioner. Imagine I'm still there. And let's say I would be the first client. And let's say I'm interested today, let's talk about a relationship. Because that's where, for many people, that's the actual more stressful part of their life. In the book, it describes hierarchy of action fields. First is self, the very next is relationship. So let's just say, I'm husband, father, son. I have different roles in different relationships, different people in my life. And I could say, for example, my mother. That's rich territory for everyone, because that's the original relationship. So I could take a moment and I could imagine that my mother is sitting there. She's been gone now 14 years, but I could just imagine that she's there, and I would notice that in my own configuration of my autonomic nervous system, certain phenomena start to appear. And I could, this would be what my body does, not what my mind, my cognitive mind is not going to help much, but what my body does in the presence of an imaginary person. And I could do that for a minute or two. I could say something, hi mom, or whatever. And then when the time's right, the facilitator could just say switch. And I would move over here, and in this chair, I would just take a moment and just imagine, being my mom. And there's no obligation to reality. Obviously, my mom is not here. She's long gone. But her consciousness has a certain configuration, a certain presence. And so I could be my mom observing my son, John, sitting in that other chair. And then what happens is this side starts to do something different from what that side did. And that's the key. That's how this method works, is by, because my mom is not really here. It's just a imaginary scenario, but the physical body will change. And that change is healthful. It means that the pendulum is swinging. If I had cortisol over there, maybe I've got dopamine over here. Serotonin, hormones of various kinds, they change in the different states. And when I switch back over here, she could have said something, of course, then I come back to myself, and I've gone through one cycle, one loop, or one pendulation, or as Peter Levine calls it, titration, from one state to another state and back. I could work on this with any problem, any issue I'm having. I could talk to someone else in my life. I could talk to my own self in the future, myself in the past. I've done this, for instance, rescuing the child who was having a problem in the past. It's great for moms and babies. Mom could just be sitting here and imagine the baby is there who is unable to speak in normal language. But when the mom switches over to be the baby, then words just float to the surface, and they're very, very meaningful. Tremendous insight becomes available. So that's quickly an introduction to the two-chair method. It's a way to safely get the pendulum swinging. And in Peter Levine, he has, like we use in Body Low So Loop, he'll have a person notice a physical sensation. Maybe they were in a car accident and they can feel the impulse to grip the steering wheel or something like that. And then they could imagine that that's them before they ever were in that accident. And this is after or during. And they switch, and all of a sudden that goes away. And then they could switch back over here and feel it again, but it'll be less. They can gradually drain the charge through exercising the pendulum swing. So Peter Levine was also there in that time in Berkeley in the late 60s, and he credited Dr. Stone with significant insights to develop his method, somatic experiencing. As I've quoted in the book, I happened to be there with the audio recorder on when he was giving a lecture, and he talked all about that time. It was quite brilliant. The fundamental concept is applied in a way that's very safe, very effective. If things get a little strange, just say switch. Very, very useful method. The Polarity Therapy Counseling, or the two-chair method.